There are many unusual indicators of how an economy is doing. Some swear by the tips given to sex workers as a predictor of economic growth, while others look at tie styles and dress lengths, and so on. However, there's one statistic that I think really shows how well an economy is doing, and that is the height of children over time. And in the UK, as well as in the USA, children are getting shorter. In fact, UK 5-year-olds are now amongst the shortest in Europe. It's hard to understate how mind-boggling this is. And to show you why, let's have a quick look at height in the UK over the last 2 millennia. As we can see, average height in the UK has actually varied up and down substantially over the last 2,000 years, alongside inequality and economic growth. But that being said, the last 150 years have seen a huge and consistent increase in height as people overall have become wealthier and eaten more and eaten better. And recently, that's all come to an end. In the last 10 years, the facts are that children in the UK have become poorer, have been eating less, and eating a lower quality of food. We now know some of the impact this poverty and food poverty is having on their health. Now, let me make something very clear. There's categorically nothing wrong with a person being short. However, when an entire population becomes shorter over time due to malnourishment, that has a devastating, catastrophic impact on the economic prospects of the entire nation. Not only are these kids less healthy, and hence more likely to need the overburdened NHS, but they're also likely to be less educated. Anecdotally, teachers in the UK speak of starving children in their class, whose rumbling stomachs drown out the education going on around them. This is a generational catastrophe and a government failing the youngest and the most vulnerable. It's not about the pandemic either. This data is actually for before the pandemic, during which child hunger presumably skyrocketed. It took Marcus Rashford to force the Tory government to provide free school meals during the Christmas holidays during the pandemic. We are so much closer to Victorian Britain than many realise. Dickens would be proud. But it's also not about immigrant children bringing the average down either. We're fortunate enough to have the data split into what the ONS calls white British children and everybody else. Side note, ONS, why do you do this? It's a bit weird. But either way, this is not a trend that's specific to particular categories of children. And it actually gets more alarming when you start to look at the underlying data. Not only are there more undernourished children, far more children are obese compared with 10 years ago. This unusual and depressing double whammy points to a really broad-ranging and large decrease in the quality of child nutrition overall. Ultra-processed food is what economists would call an inferior good. People buy more of it as they get poorer, and as the price of fresh vegetables and energy skyrockets. It is a cruel and unusual picture, both for children who don't have access to healthy food, as well as for those who do not eat enough. The people in charge have lots of phrases to describe starving children: malnourishment, undernutrition, food insecurity. And don't get me wrong, these distinctions can be useful, but they're often used to imply a difference that doesn't exist. There are starving kids in Africa, but in the UK we merely have households less able to afford food. Likewise, the cost of living crisis anywhere else would be talked about as everybody's getting poorer. But the Conservative government uses the jargon as a means to cover up the consequences of the destruction they've wrought upon this country and upon the people living in it. It gets even worse though. Various state bodies under the Conservative government have started to obscure or hide data relating to child hunger. Take the National Child Measurement Programme as an example. This is an NHS initiative to monitor the health and the growth of kids in the UK. It measures weight, height, BMI, age, and until 2019, all the underlying data was publicly available. But from 2020 onwards, they stopped publishing the underlying data, making it much harder for us to know whether or not children are becoming shorter due to not having enough food. The headline numbers also cherry-pick data to make things appear better than they actually are. But when you can find the data, it all paints exactly the same picture. The deluge of referrals to food banks, eligibility for free school meals, or food insecurity statistics. There are substantial numbers of starving children in the UK. If you're affected by the UK's housing crisis, you can click the video shown on screen now to find out exactly what caused it. If you'd like to keep us drawing attention to the impoverishment that conservative ideology causes, you're welcome to subscribe. This has been Bonobo Economicus on behalf of underrepresented economic topics. See you in the next one.